Okay, this video is a book review. Here's the book, Arthur Schopenhauer, The Art of Literature. This is a magnificent book. This is probably my favorite book ever written about writing. Schopenhauer was a genius. He's a German genius. He was a crazy genius. All the geniuses are a little crazy. But, he was wealthy, so he had a lot of time to sit around, and he truly was a genius. He had a lot of time to sit around thinking. He was also a little bit pissed off because he had been ostracized by the philosophy community, the university community. And so, I have that in common with him. I'm sort of ostracized by the high-fat phonies, ostracized by conventional medicine. So you have a lot of time outside the establishment to think. And he was a wealthier guy. He didn't have to work, so he just read a lot every day, would go to the theater, converse with some aristocrat friends, and then he would get up the next morning and write. And so he's really brilliant, and he tells the truth, and he writes in a clear, simple manner. So here's the book again, The Art of Literature. It's magnificent. If you want to write and you want to write something good, I'm not talking about write a piece of crap that sells well. I'm just talking about write high-quality stuff that has lasting value. That's it. And it kind of goes with this book, Ayn Rand, The Romantic Manifesto. I just made a book review of this just a little while ago, so you can see that as well. So anyways, we'll get started on it. I even thought, like, if I could be born again, one of the things I'd want to do is learn German so I could read Schopenhauer in his native language. I would also like to read Goethe, but Schopenhauer is a little deeper in my experience. And Nietzsche, I think, is kind of a crazy jerk, but he's entertaining at times. Okay, so here we go. Write like you are talking to an intelligent friend. Have a conversation, then write after that. Oh, these are my thoughts. Make a mind map to remind you all the topics to cover. A great book has a great topic, a big opener, surging individualism, a strong voice from the author, rhetoric built into the sentence structure quite often, bold encouragement of the audience. I mean, why read it if there's not something useful? Religious metaphors, they're often very powerful and memorable. Illustrations, stories greater than exposition. Just tell the story rather than describe so much. Paradox, climax, connected to the ending. It's all good. Those are things that I think about when I'm writing a book. Voltaire was a great writer. Again, a bit of a crazy jerk, but a genius and a great writer. All styles are good except the boring kind. One should always aim to be interesting rather than exact. It's not enough to see and know a work. One should be affected by it. If you can't elicit emotion, you probably haven't that strong of a message. Victor Hugo, truth and indignation is the most eloquent speaker. Laughter is sunshine. Perseverance is the secret of triumph. So I just rattled off a couple quotes that are going to sort of set the background that are going to be complementary to what Schopenhauer has to say. Okay, now we're into Schopenhauer. Okay, there is no greater mistake than to suppose that the last work is always the most correct. That what was written later on is in every case an improvement to what was written before. And that change always means progress. Real thinkers, men of right judgment, people who are in earnest with their subject, these are all exceptions. Vermin is the rule everywhere in the world. And that's funny because that's like the internet. There's a couple really good people out there that know a lot and tell the truth. There's lots of people who are very nice and have a couple good things to say but don't know that much. And then there's lots of famous BS artists that are lying their butts off. It often happens that an old and excellent book is ousted by a new and bad one. Yeah, I think Dr. McDougall's legacy is being erased. Okay, and these new and bad ones were written for money. Style is the physiognomy of the mind and a safer index to character than the face. When I have read a few pages of an author, I know fairly well how far he can bring me. Every really great writer tries to express his thought as purely, clearly, and definitely and shortly as possible. Simplicity has always been held to be a mark of truth. It is also a mark of genius. So what he also said elsewhere, I didn't always include his negative statements, but he said if you start reading and you feel like the writer is just trying to fill up space, because you'll often get that with these BS books where they really have only about 5 pages worth of material and they're trying to fill up a 250-page book. So they start with a bunch of nonsense at the beginning. They keep giving you a tease. We'll tell you something good soon. We'll tell you something good soon. Those books are almost always a piece of garbage, and you should stop right there and throw them in the garbage. They don't have anything useful to tell you. A lot of times the book's like a commercial for signing up for a costing course. But yeah, the good writer, there's something good right in the beginning. Okay, he goes on. An obscure and vague manner of expression is always and everywhere a very bad sign. In 99 cases out of 100, it comes from vagueness of thought. And this, again, almost always means that there is something radically wrong and incongruous about the thought itself. In a word, that it is incorrect. Okay, that's Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer okay, a little bit more about Schopenhauer. He lived from 1788 to 1860, so he lived on the tail end of Goethe. He's younger than Goethe. He did have a little bit of life overlap with Nietzsche. Nietzsche had read his works and initially was fascinated and enthralled by Schopenhauer, but he later saw him to be too pessimistic. Schopenhauer got into a little bit of weird stuff, a little bit of writing from India, and he also was a little bit spread around vague. I think one of the things that hurt Schopenhauer is he never, got married and settled down to have kids. And I think if he had done that, that will give you a lot of perspective on life. And he was bitter. He didn't get along with his mother. And it sounded like his mother was really a jerk and a bit of a sleaze. Cheated on his father, so he kind of hated her. And his father died prematurely. He was a bit of a... And I also wrote that, Schopenhauer was a lonely old man who spent a lot of time reading, thinking, and writing, so I have nothing in common with him. I'm kind of the same thing in many ways, unfortunately. Schopenhauer had money by inheritance, free to do his philosophy. He thought that men tend to largely get their intellect from their mothers and their character from their fathers. And I wondered why my kids were more like their mother than me. Why can't they be more like me? Then I realized that the zygote gets DNA from both parents, but that the mitochondria comes only from the mama, as well as the egg's membrane, the cytoplasm. And upon this thought, initially, I was a little sad. Then I realized that if mama provided 2/3 of the kid's genetic material, she should be responsible for 2/3 of the kid's expenses. Yeah, right. A happy life, says Schopenhauer, is impossible. The highest a man can achieve is a heroic life. And I like that because you can't control the circumstances of your life that make you happy or not, but you can decide what do you believe is your purpose and your ideal destiny, and you can pursue that. And when you pursue it in a good, heroic manner, then you like yourself because you know that you're doing the best you can. It is only in old age that intellectual men attain their sublime expression. Yeah, you just know a lot as you get older. And that's one of the nice things about being a writer is you keep getting better as you write. Other things fade. You're not going to be as good an athlete as you get older as you were when you were younger. Okay, you're not going to be as good looking as you get old as you were when you were younger. But you can keep on getting better and better at writing, and you can have more and more knowledge as you get older. That's a good thing. A great writer writes because he has something to say. Before he writes, he plans his book like an architect plans a building. He has thought about the topic. He has conversed about the topic. He has experience with the topic. Yeah, those are all signs of good writing. And you can kind of sense it. Once you know what to look for, you'll sense it if it's there or not. A man who has not enough originality to think out a new title for a book will be much less capable of giving it new contents. Yeah, a lot of the clever writers, they got funny titles. True brevity consists in saying only what is worth saying, while avoiding all that everyone can think for themselves. Good writing should be governed by the rule that a man can think of only one thing clearly at a time, and therefore he should not be expected to think of two or more things at one and the same moment. So you don't want to make your sentences too long. I always thought Faulkner sucked as a writer. I never liked Faulkner, okay? You want to make it so it's easy for them to entertain. And it's good to throw some fun in there, throw some jokes, metaphor, surprises in there. So the writer gets this feeling that they're talking to a friend, who's going to make it infotainment, informational and entertaining. That's why you talk with your friend. You take turns trying to see who can come up with a better joke, tell each other a story, share with them some, pressing emotional matter, whatever it might be. And a book should be the same way. The good writer writes the quintessence only, nothing that the reader would think for themselves. True brevity is saying only what needs to be worth saying and avoiding tedious detail that everyone can supply for themselves. To use many words to communicate few thoughts is an unmistakable sign of mediocrity. To gather much thought into a few words is the stamp of genius. So I try to pay attention to that whenever I write, and whenever I write an email, anything I write, when I dictate a report, I always try to say, how can I say this as clearly as possible in a few words? I mean, don't get me wrong. If I need to clarify something, I'll add extra sentences, but I want to always try to make myself to write clearly and well to the best of my ability, even though I'm in a hurry a lot of times. And I think just by habitually doing that, with my medical writing, my emails, and everything else, I think I maintain a higher level of skill than I would have if I didn't do that. Schopenhauer continues, the task to think what nobody has yet thought about that which everybody sees. Okay, only he who writes entirely for the sake of what he has to say, writes anything worth writing. Greatest works of the greatest men all belong to a time when they had to write them for almost nothing or for a very small amount. Yeah, I've written several books for publishers, and I've also self-published books. And I can tell you it's a lot more fun to self-publish, because when you self-publish, you could write whatever you want. So you can make it whatever way you want. When you write for a publisher, they're going to force you. I've had all these medical books I wrote where they forced me to make every chapter, 3 pages or 4 pages or whatever their format was. They had all these templates. In addition, they do things like they take out most of the jokes. They take out almost all the abbreviations, a lot of the idioms. They go, oh, well, foreign readers don't understand that. So the benefit of a publisher is that they will market the book to a wide audience. So you're more likely to reach a lot of readers, and you'll make more money most of the time because they market the book. But they don't actually improve the book. They decrease the quality of the book. Okay. He who writes for fools will always have a large audience. Yeah, most of the audience on the internet are they're pros, listening to high-fat phonies and paleo, keto, carnivore, low-carb nonsense. It only takes a few pages to see the author's skill and intention. If the author does not quickly display some valuable information and only seems to be writing to fill up the page with words, then quickly throw the book into the garbage, because time is too valuable to waste. Okay, a great writer is like a man who knows the correct time, but it is of no use to him because everyone else is using a different clock. He writes for great men and for posterity because too few of his contemporaries will be able to follow his thoughts. Yeah, I had that feeling too. I went to a Christmas party for doctors, and I had this feeling, man. I was like, these guys are a bunch of fucking illiterates, okay? It pisses me off that, I'm so far ahead of all these other doctors, yet they haven't read my books. And it's like, you dumbasses, why don't you open a book and read? Some of them because they're busy, some of them because they don't know, some of them because they're jealous. But still, it's pathetic. Most of the doctors I know, and I know lots of them, they're functional illiterates. They don't read books. It's like they figure like they know what they need to know to make their money, and they're tired of reading and studying. Just put the book in your bathroom and start reading. I mean, I felt sad that I had gotten to a certain point in my career, my mid-30s, and I really didn't know the basics of disease. Once I started reading the nutritional literature, why wouldn't you want to get that? We went through all this effort. Why not, complete the journey and learn what causes disease? Nutrition, epidemiology, toxicology. Okay, Schopenhauer continues. The great writer has really thought about his topic. He expresses in a fresh and forcible way. Simplicity has always been held as a mark of truth. It is also a mark of genius. The object of science is to recognize the many in the one, to perceive the rules in any given example, and not to go on counting up facts ad infinitum. Since similes and metaphors are such a powerful engine of knowledge, it is a sign of great intelligence in a writer if his similes are unusual and at the same time to the point. A good work is doubly good if it is short. Students and learned persons of all sorts and every age aim as a rule at acquiring information rather than insight, but information is only a means of insight and of little value in and of itself. With by far the largest number of learned men, knowledge is a means, not an end. That is why they will never achieve any great work, because to do that, he who pursues knowledge must pursue it as an end and treat everything else, even existence itself, as only a means. The public has general respect for professionals and distrust of amateurs. However, true excellence can only be attained where the work has been produced for its own sake alone. And the truth is that the hobbyist, the amateur, treats his subject as an end, whereas the professional treats it merely as a means. The hobbyist is really in earnest about a matter and has a direct interest because he likes it and he pursues it con amore. It is these hobbyists, and not the professional hirelings that have always done the greatest work. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying here too. I've gone through the internal medicine books, and they all suck. I don't care which one you're talking about. If you're talking about the internal medicine text, the Harrisons, the Cecils, if you're talking about the big neurology textbook, the Samuels, I can tell you they all suck. They all suck because basically they were written in a half-assed manner to sell drugs. And they might not have made that their primary intention to sell drugs, but they just included the narrow-minded content that leads to selling drugs. They did not go into the pathophysiology. They did not read the nutrition literature. They have not read the toxicology literature. They have not even read the pathophysiology literature. They simply have read their own field, the internal medicine literature, the neurology literature, the cardiology literature, the endocrine literature, and that's why those books suck. They don't tell you what causes the disease. They don't tell you how it can be cured, how it can be prevented. And that's how it is. And that's why I confidently can say, yeah, I've rewritten the textbooks in those fields. And that they're textbooks. They're standard, big 1,500, 2,000 page textbooks. They all stink. They're a joke. They're not even bad. They stink, okay? Just like you laugh at somebody from the 1700s drawing blood on every patient. That's essentially what they do. Give a drug on every patient, a drug that doesn't work and is completely inappropriate. Okay, continuing. With Schopenhauer. The intellectual attainments of a man who thinks for himself resemble a fine painting, where the light and the shade are correct, the tones sustained, the color perfectly harmonized. It is true to life. On the other hand, the intellectual attainments of the mere man of learning, they're like a large palette full of all sorts of colors, which are at best systematically arranged, but devoid of harmony, connection, or meaning. Okay, that's what he's sort of saying. They can rattle off a bunch of stuff, but they can't tell you anything useful. To think with one's own head is they aim at developing a coherent whole, a system, even though it is not strictly a complete one. The really scientific thinker, although he has need of much knowledge, and so must read a great deal, his mind is strong enough to master it all, to assimilate and to incorporate it to a system of his own thoughts, and to make it fit in with the organic unity of his insight, which, though vast, is also always growing. The thinker stands in the same relationship to the book philosopher as the eyewitness does to the historian. He speaks from direct knowledge of his own. The thinker is like the man who has traveled to the other place and lived there for some time, rather than the book philosopher, the book scholar who has only read travel guides about it. The man who thinks for himself can easily be distinguished from the book philosopher by the way he talks, by his marked earnestness and the originality, the directness and the personal conviction that stamp all his thoughts and expressions. The book philosopher lets it be seen that everything he has is second-hand. The works of all truly capable minds are distinguished by a character of decision, decisiveness, and definiteness, which means that they are clear. A truly capable mind always knows what it wants to express. The characteristic sign of a mind of the highest order is that it always judges firsthand. And I've seen that too. I've been around some really smart, and they're really highly opinionated, almost to the point of being offensive. They're constantly contradicting the books and standard dogma, but that's why they're ahead of the game. What light is to the outer physical world, intellect is to the inner world of consciousness. Only where intellect exceeds the measure needed for living does knowledge become an end in itself. It is consequently a quite abnormal event if some man's intellect deserts its natural vocation, that of serving the will, by perceiving mere relations between things, in order to occupy itself purely objectively. But it is precisely this which is the origin of art, poetry, and philosophy, and which are therefore produced by an organ which is doing something it was not originally intended for that purpose. For intellect is fundamentally a hard-working factory hand, whom its demanding master, the will, keeps busy from morning to night. So what he's basically saying for the average guy, he just uses his brain to make a little money, get a little food, get a little romance, and he really doesn't care much about anything beyond that. But he says, for the person who wants to do beautiful intellectual work, if this hard-driven serf, the mind, should at once happen to do some work of its own, voluntarily, during its free time, of its own initiative, and without any object but the work itself, simply for its own satisfaction, then this is the genuine work of art. Indeed, if pushed to the maximum, a work of genius. Such as purely objective employment of the intellect, as well as creating all artistic, all poetical and philosophical achievements of the higher kind, it also creates all purely scientific achievement in general. Talent works for money and for fame. The motive which moves genius to productivity is, on the other hand, less easy to determine. It isn't for money because a genius seldom gets any. It isn't for fame because fame is uncertain. It's rather an instinct of a unique sort of virtue whereby the genius is impelled to express what he knows in enduring works without being conscious of any additional motivation. It takes place by and large with the same sort of necessity as a tree brings forth fruit. Yeah, and that's how I felt when I was making my books. I sort of felt like I had to do this. It was sort of like so much of my life was spent alone studying. I had to go through so much BS. I sort of felt like writing some good books, some excellent books, would make my life more worthwhile. That, I had to give up so much. I wanted to, in a sense, make it count for something. And also, I was sad, all this time I spent being a doctor, then to later realize in my mid-30s that much of what we were doing was BS and it was wrong and our books were wrong, and I'm pissed off. I went through all this and, I could have saved my mother, kept her alive longer, my father, a lot of friends and their family, if only I had known this stuff before. So I'll put it in a book and make it known for the few people motivated, smart enough, energetic enough to learn it. Okay, then he says, genius has a gift of greater clarity of thought and knowledge, and he wishes to give the whole species, and it is this that impels him to his work. Okay, I got a phone call, but let me just finish it. Okay, the growth of ideas rests at seizing connections between things. Okay, little more Schopenhauer. All right, I got to get going. I'm almost done with this talk. He must accept that he probably will never be known in his lifetime. Yeah, that's my fate too. Okay, when he's talking about geniuses. But the genius does it anyways, even though he won't. He'll only be known to posterity, probably. A lot of people have told me that's what's going to happen to me. So anyways, he just goes on a little more about genius, and it's beautiful. And so I love Schopenhauer. I learned so much from him. And he really is a genius. And here you can read it if you want yourself. It's beautiful, but I got to get this phone call. So if people really like this, let me know. Maybe I'll do another Schopenhauer. But Schopenhauer is magnificent. And that's the book to read. This is the book, Schopenhauer on the Art of Literature. It's a magnificent book. It's an awesome book. It's one of my all-time favorite books. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that.